Good day everybody. In this episode I finally get round to telling you my thoughts on the overall build, some of the points that I particularly like and some of the things that I dislike, and I also go through the costings. Now the first thing I want to touch on is things that I would do differently if I were to do another build, which quite frankly is very unlikely at my age, and at times this build was quite stressful, but overall very enjoyable. The first thing that I would make sure is that I was actually present when the wall footings were built for the boundary wall. You will have noticed in a previous episode near the beginning of this series that I was a bit concerned about the footings, and then we had a bit of subsidence in one part of the side wall. Fortunately this is settled, it's not gone down any further despite a rainy season, so I think we're safe. But I would definitely insist that no work is done unless I was on site to observe it and supervise it, because they had a problem with the footings and they took a decision not to dig very deep because of wet ground, and I would have approached it differently to them and it probably would have been a safer wall. As it happens, I don't think we're going to have a problem with it, but that's one thing that I would certainly have done at the beginning, is to make an insistence that I was there when they started work rather than letting them decide when they're starting. The second and most important point, which you probably have gathered throughout the series, is that I would definitely want to be here at all times when they're working, and I was absent a lot of the time, and so was Suntoray due to other commitments. And it was difficult to manage, frankly, and being the first time that we've done a build like this in Thailand, we didn't really know what to expect, and we didn't really think that we would have problems to the degree that we did. Nothing major, don't get me wrong, but there were occasions when things weren't done to order, and consequently they either had to be redone or compromises had to be made. One thing I missed was the setting of the drain pipes at the foot of the wall all the way around. I was there for one side and then I missed the building of the second rear wall, and not all the drainage pipes were inserted through the wall. So that's compromised the drainage of the site really. And we had to invent some other drainage solutions to compensate. The other thing I missed was the laying out of this garage, or carport as it's more appropriately called. I did draw a plan for this with dimensions, and I left it with Suntoray and also some verbal instructions, but unfortunately that didn't translate to the actual building. So consequently it's slightly shorter than it should be, which means that her car sticks out slightly at the front here. No big deal, but it would have been nice for it to be just a little bit longer in accordance with the plans. And the placing of the posts was such on the plan that it fitted in nicely with the wall of the shower room here. Unfortunately, the way it was built, the actual post is slightly inside the shower room, as you can see there. Consequently that involved extra work for them tiling, and that's about it really, because it hasn't really affected the performance of the shower room. It's just, I suppose aesthetically it's not as pretty as it could have been if that post had been in the corner. Anyway, it is only a shower room in the garage, so again, it's a very minor detail really. The next thing that I would do if I was building again would be to make sure that I was here when they set the ring beam, and make sure that the ring beam on the ground was actually slightly below the intended soil level rather than starting at exactly the soil level. This is to reduce the likelihood of erosion from the soil infill underneath our slab floors. Another thing I would do differently is to do with drainage. I would make sure that there's drainage in each section of the wall at the bottom onto the land surrounding the house, but also that there was drainage from the top, from the soil level, which is not the stone level you see here, but obviously the level of the soil where the water would run along, so that any water that collected on the soil and didn't drain away quickly would actually go down the drain. This I've done in a couple of places, if you recall. One was about here, and one was around the side of the house next to the poo hole, and they've worked very well. The next thing that I would do differently is to insist that we had a full garage built rather than a carport. I rather let Suntoray do what she wanted to do here, and she was insistent that ties do not build higher on the retaining wall to then create a garage. Well, I've done it before here and it's perfectly fine. There's absolutely no reason for it, and there's actually no reason why the garage roof couldn't have been supported by the column here that's part of the retaining wall. So we've ended up with a carport effectively which isn't weatherproof, which I would have liked, but again it's a question of compromise in some respects. Another thing I would do differently is to make sure that I was here for the driveway pour. Goes along with being here at all times when they're working really. Suntoray did a very good job of creating this levelled area here, a slight incline away from the carport, but a good place to park your cars. And then she did a very good job of this gradient down here, but unfortunately it did end up outside the compound too high, and then when the gate was added and the track was added, that meant that we've ended up with a ridge here, and consequently what happens when it rains is that we get water collecting along this edge here, and unfortunately when the gate was put in they didn't think about the drainage, and there's no real way for the water to get out properly in this corner. So that's something I'm going to have to work on. I'm going to have to dig this out a little bit and form a little drainage channel there, so we can make sure that this area is kept free from standing water. I think the last thing that I would do differently is to do with this front roof, which was something that Suntoray wanted to add after we had built the main structure of the house. I would prefer to have posts supporting it, 3 posts rather than these cantilever type brackets. I think there's a considerable weight on them, and I don't have a lot of confidence in them in the long term, and I really would have insisted on posts if I'd been here when they were doing it, I don't see a problem with having three posts coming down. It wouldn't have detracted very much from the design in my view, and it would have made it very much more stronger. Now let's talk about things that are good, that I particularly like about this place and I'm very pleased we're done. And the first thing goes back to the very beginning of the build, when Suntory was creating adequate space for the house from what is her rubber plantation that you're looking at right now. And this area apparently is about 2 rye, and we've effectively cordoned off 1/4 of a rye. And when she was deciding the size and we checked it out, you'll see in a very early video that when they were starting to put the soil down, she decided to take an extra row of trees out. And I think that was a very good decision, because it's just given us a little bit extra space so that the house is not too tight against the back wall, and it's set back from the road just enough to make it comfortable, so we're not sitting right on top of the road looking at people out of our window effectively as they pass. The next thing that I'm particularly pleased with is Suntory's decision to build the house 50 centimetres from ground level. So despite the fact that we've raised the plot by 1 metre to ensure that we don't have problems with flooding, she's also raised the house 50 centimetres from the soil level, the designated soil level, which will help when we have really bad weather. If we do have any water collecting within these stones, then it will help to keep the house dry. The next thing I'm particularly pleased about is to do with the side boundary wall here. If you look back at one of the early videos to do with this, you'll see how they originally were going to build this side wall all at the same height, which is roughly 1.7 metres from where I'm standing now, so it was going to be about 1.75 metres from soil height, and they were going to build it all the way down to the corner. That was just a misunderstanding between me and Suntory about what the best option was, and I insisted that they didn't build it, that they stopped. They designed it so that it was the lower height as with the front, and that they took it back 3 sections. And I explained at the time it was to preserve the view. I said, because when we're going to be sitting down on the terrace, if we have a higher wall, we'll lose about half our view. And the way that it's been done is really excellent. I'm really pleased with it. Standing up, you get the view all the way around, but part of the view is a neighbour's property and the pens that they keep their buffalo in. When you sit down, a lot of that disappears, but you retain a really good aspect across the farmland through these 3 sections here. So I'm very pleased that I insisted on that, and that's worked out really well. The next thing I'm very pleased about, which was another one of Suntory's ideas, was actually to create this 3rd shower room outside in the garage. It's actually a very good use of space in my opinion, because we don't need a huge garage for 2 huge cars. We need almost 1.5 garages. And her idea that this would be useful when she comes back from work really dirty and she needs to clean off before going in the house really does work well. And it's actually quite an attractive room in my opinion. She chose all the tiles. It does seem like it might be a bit busy for some people, but I do like it actually, and I think it's a good space. It's quite compact, but it's got everything in it, and it does work very, very well. So yes, I'm actually very pleased we've got this facility, and it does mean that people that are working on her farm, which are often family members, can come in here and use that facility of, you know, the toilet and washroom if they need to. So I'm very pleased that she had that idea. Now, one thing I'm very pleased with is the roof panels. You'll see in one of the episodes, just before they were fitted, they were all stacked up and they were in the sun, and I couldn't touch the surface of the top panel, but I could touch the underside where the foam was, and I was absolutely incredulous that it was so efficient at keeping the heat from going through. So I've got every confidence in this roof now that it will actually insulate the house thoroughly. We haven't bothered with loft insulation, with insulation above the plaster ceiling. The next thing I'm particularly happy about here is the plumbing. I did it all myself to guarantee that we didn't have any leaks from the joints, and I'm very pleased to say that we have not had a single leak from anything that I've fitted in the way of pipes that were glued together, and the occasional leak from something like a tap that's been put on has been easily sorted with extra tape. So what we did was we were lucky enough to have electricity on site and water, so we made sure that the pump was purchased nice and early, and we hooked it up to the system even before walls were built inside the house, and pipes were blanked off, and we had the whole system under pressure for days and days, and I have never had the pump cycling unnecessarily, demonstrating that there's a loss of pressure in the system and therefore there's a leak. So yeah, I'm very, very pleased about that. And as some people have said, you know, these plastic pipes and using them for plumbing here is so simple. I wouldn't really try my own plumbing in the UK, for example, where they tend to use they tend to use copper pipes, and the fittings of those are far different from the glued fittings here, and it's just a different ball game completely. The other thing about this country is if you get a leak and you've got a bit of water, it will dry out pretty quickly anyway because of the climate, whereas in Europe that's not the case. So very pleased with the plumbing. Everything went to plan with that. I'm very pleased with the design of the house. I spent quite a lot of time actually working out the dimensions of spaces, the sizes of bedrooms, so that they weren't too small, working out where the furniture would go and the bed, so that we knew everything fitted in, and the size of the living room and the terrace. And I'm really, really pleased with the space I've got here. It's big, there's no doubt about it. I mean, for two people to live here, even a small family, this terrace, this living room and the kitchen is really very, very adequate in my view. And I'm thrilled about the space we've got here. The next thing is the ceiling mouldings and the mouldings around the windows. This is Suntare's idea. I hadn't expected it actually, and then she just announced that she'd done it when I was away. And she got the mouldings put around the windows on the outside and the door, and she had the mouldings put in the living room. And when I saw the pictures of it, I asked her, "Are you doing it in the bedrooms?" And she said no. I said, "Well, please do it, you know, that looks so good. It just makes the rooms look special, really, with actually no effort." This coving, as we call it in the UK, it's just got a lovely shape to it, and you can just glance up and you've just got something to look at where the ceiling joins the wall. So I'm very, very pleased with that. That was a very good idea of hers. And the people that were doing it have done a good job with the post here, and they've got the moulding down the bottom of the post, as well as at the top. So it just adds a little bit of character to what is a very ordinary box design of property, frankly. It was always going to be a simple property to save costs. That was the main thing about it. But these little touches just, in my view, just add a little bit of design to it. And you can see that we've got the mouldings around the long tables, around the edges, the benches or the tables around the terrace. So that's worked out very well in my view. Now, the next thing that I really like, and again it's Sunteray's decision and idea, was the width of these steps at the front. I had actually thought we should have about 1.5 meters width of step, and she said no, she wanted 2 meters because it makes the entrance sort of grander, and it adds a bit of character to the design. It makes it more spacious, if you like, and she was absolutely right. This width of step going up to the terrace really is very, very good. If it had only been 1.5 meters, I think we would have lost at least 2 of these tiles, 2 and a bit of these tiles, so it probably would have only come to about here from over there, and that would have looked a bit mean and a bit sort of functional, if you like. So yes, all credit to her for that. That was a very, very good idea as well. Similarly, Sunteray was ultimately responsible for deciding the width of the gate here onto the driveway. And I initially suggested 3.5 meters based on the fact that my car is about 2 meters wide, so it would give plenty of space for the car to get through and to turn into. But she said no, 5 meters. 5 meters would be better because it's safer, because the road outside is narrow, so we don't have the ability to turn and face the gate straight on very, very easily. And she's absolutely right again. This width is really good. It makes coming in and out with big cars. We've had pickup trucks in here, and we've had deliveries from small lorries as well, and they've all managed to get through this gap very, very easily. So I'm very pleased about that particular aspect of the design. So my car's only 2 meters wide, but this is a 5 meter gate. Wow, you know, you can sort of see that really is a bonus. I'm very, very pleased with the gravel around the house. I didn't think actually we'd actually get to a point where it would be neat and tidy, but it is. It's taken a bit of extra work to make it that way, and we've used, wow, I think we've used either 16 or 20 cubic meters of gravel. But it is a big area, and it needs to be about 5 centimeters thick to make it really weed proof and good drainage. Yeah, this was always my idea from the very beginning, to have this. I'm not a great fan of having concrete around houses. I think that leads to extra work. It creates a situation where water easily splashes against the house, and concrete does eventually need cleaning because it goes green in areas which don't get the sun. It's prone to cracking if it's not laid well. It can get damaged. It's not self-draining, so if it's not laid well, sloping away from the house, it can create problems with a damp wall. I like gravel, basically, and it is pretty much maintenance free. We can go away and some weeds will grow, and when we come back all we have to do is pull them out of the gravel. We don't have them connecting with the earth and making a difficult situation for us. It's self-draining. You can shift it around a bit if you get areas which do start to discolour, go green or something, but generally algae doesn't grow on gravel because it's a rough surface. It tends to like concrete better, which is smoother and more suitable for it. Someone said, won't it just get so hot in the sun that it just throws up heat all night? Not in my experience, no, because you only have to go 1 or 2 stones below the surface and it's cool. It doesn't heat all the way through down the whole depth of the gravel because there's so much air in between the pieces. So it's not like a solid block or a solid wall which will heat and heat and heat, and the heat gets trapped within it. The other thing, of course, is that we don't get a lot of sun around here. When I'm filming this, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and to be honest with you, apart from first thing in the morning, this area here is pretty much in shade all day, so it's not really going to get any heat on it anyway. The last thing on my list of things that I particularly like about the house is the kitchen. I'm very proud about having fitted it myself. Obviously the actual spaces for the base units were built by somebody else, and adequately so. Had a bit of trouble actually getting those base doors in place. Bit of trouble in that I had to chip away bits of the wall around there to get them to fit, but that really wasn't a big deal. But I am very pleased. I've managed to fit it quite well. I think it's quite neat. I think it looks great. It gives us bags of storage for kitchen stuff, cooking stuff, food and other things as well. So to me this is a very, very good kitchen. It's got brilliant space here between the actual work surface here and the bar. Plenty of space. If there were a lot of people in here you wouldn't have any problem walking around and manoeuvring between each other. Yes, I'm very, very pleased with this. So that's my list of good things about the house that I'm particularly happy with. Now we have to talk about some of the bad things. Okay, I'll start off by saying that there's absolutely nothing that's really, really bad about this place that's killing me. I think it's all very, very good, very, very nice really, and I'm sure it will last me out. I suppose I've got 1 or 2 concerns which I've touched on already when I was talking about things I would do differently. The first is the boundary wall footings here in this corner. It has stopped moving, so I think we're okay. And as soon as I saw cracks appearing, I got a couple of truckloads of earth delivered to put down in this corner here and spread along the edge to give it some extra support, if you like, and keep the water away from it, and that seems to have done the trick. So that's an area of concern for the longer term, and if we do get a problem with it leaning or dropping, then we have to think about underpinning. But I've got that in my mind as to what would be required, and that's a fairly simple job really. The next thing is this front roof construction, which I mentioned earlier. I'm not particularly a fan of it, so I mean it's okay, but it's not bad enough for me to actually want to change it and add posts and make a fuss about it like that. And the last thing is the carport or garage, because it's not weatherproof. It rather limits where you can store things. That's the main thing. I'm not particularly worried about my car getting wet, because the reality is that in the hot dry weather the car's going to get dusty anyway, and even in a sealed garage with a door that comes down properly, cars get dusty. They do in the UK. So I'm quite accepting of the fact that the car will get a little bit wet and a little bit dusty, whichever type of parking space it's in. But it's just where you can put things and how you can store things, because we've got a good storage area down the side here, which I don't feel that I can use for anything particularly, because I know that when it rains the water gets in there all the way along very, very easily. So it means that storage has to be in a less vulnerable position, which is this back wall here, which doesn't get the weather so badly, and also in the corner of the garage by the shower room. Yeah, so that's the only other thing that I'm disappointed in, if you like. We can do something about it, but it's going to look a bit of a Heath Robinson bodge job, I think, to make this weatherproof now. So I'll probably leave it, and as you can see from my sort of workbench, if you like, area, what I've done is I've basically used plastic boxes to store things in, and they're weatherproof, so I think I'll just continue in that vein. I'll get another couple of those and put my jars of screws and nails and things inside them, and any small tools and boxes that aren't weatherproof, like the drill box there, and then that will solve the problem of rain getting in here. It'll cost me a few £100 for a couple of boxes. I think that's a better option than trying to basically make this weatherproof and probably failing a couple of times before we find an adequate solution. And of course that will cost us several £1,000s. Right, let's talk about some general things that might help people that are going to be building their own house. The first thing is planning permission. This is actually required, as I understand it, anywhere in Thailand before you start building. Now, we didn't get planning permission, but that's only because Suntory knows everybody in the land office, the local land office, and the build was unlikely to be contentious. So my advice to anyone is, whether you're planning doing your own architectural design and building yourself, or whether someone else is building the whole thing for you, is to get planning permission sorted beforehand, which will include details of your wastewater disposal. Something that caught me out when I was designing the house was the position of the beds required by Buddhists. Apparently your feet must be facing sunrise and not sunset, so just be careful to make sure that your design and the position of your house fits with this rule relative to the shape of the room that you're going to put your bed in and the position you may have left for wardrobes. Similarly, the position of the toilet. This caught me out again in our ensuite. because it's important that when you're sitting on the toilet, you're not facing the front of the house. That's considered a no-no. It doesn't matter that that's the case with our garage toilet, because that's not technically living space. Drainage is the next thing. Officially, you need septic and grey water tank drainage before any discharge to open land, and this is covered in the planning permission stage. So you may think that ours doesn't fit this very well because we drain directly from sinks and showers onto Sunteray's land, and that's actually correct. But as I said before, it's who you know, not what you know. But my advice is to always plan with proper grey water and septic tanks in appropriate positions, and working to create grey water which is somewhat purified before it drains off onto any public land or neighbour's land. With regard to drainage, in practice in our village and probably most rural villages, just a simple concrete sewerage pit is built, what I call a poo hole. However, plans that you produce to the authority should show a more sophisticated configuration, I think. I imagine if you use a building contractor, they will naturally use multiple tanks nowadays to comply with the regulations. Right, let's talk about the actual costs of this build. I'm going to try and break these down into various sections that might be relevant to people. I'm not going to go into too much detail because, quite frankly, a lot of the intimate detail, the costs will depend on your preferences. So, for example, the roofing can vary considerably in amount of costs per square metre, depending on the type you have. The first thing we did was raise our plot 1 metre, which is 400 metres cubed of soil that we required, very roughly. We also built a retaining wall to keep that 1 metre of soil from washing away, and basically on top of that, or as part of that, we then had a boundary wall which doesn't hold back any soil, it just creates a fence around the property. And the area of those 2 walls effectively is 300 square metres. And the cost of that came out at 247,000 baht. Now the next thing we did was built a garage with a shower room, and the cost of that came out at 86,500 baht. Obviously, if you're going to just build a carport or a garage with no shower room, that figure will come down a bit. The next stage of the build was to actually put up the house posts, create a roof, and also lay the ring beam at ground level. And the cost of that came out at 283,000 baht. So the house build after the posts, roof and ring beam to completion of it was 580,000 baht. So the actual house itself, the total cost was 863,000 baht. Now, some general information. Our plot area is 20 metres by 20 metres, so that's 400 metres squared, which is the equivalent of 1/4 of a rai in Thailand. One rai being 1600 square metres. The house area, including the terrace, which we consider to be living area, is 90 square metres. So that equates to a cost per square metre of 9,600 baht. The garage area is approximately 43 square metres. So the garage or carport cost per square metre comes out at 2,000 baht per square metre. As I've mentioned earlier, the retaining and boundary wall area was 300 metres squared. So the cost per square metre for building that was 690 baht, excluding the soil. The soil cost 40,000 baht. So that's the total of all our costings. And I'm very pleased at the final cost for the house. Per square metre, 9,600 baht is at the lower end of expectations, frankly, these days. I've heard it said that you can expect to pay between 10 and 15,000 baht per square metre if you're building a basic house and you're not being extravagant with your design or your fittings. I would say it's probably closer to 15 now if you get a construction company to do it. Obviously we had extra expense with raising the land and building a retaining wall as well as a boundary wall. But nevertheless, I think that the whole thing has come out relatively cheaply. We have spent a total of 1.2 million for everything. Now, one thing we didn't have to buy was the land. Suntaray already owned that, and she's owned it for a little while, so the cost of this plot equivalent is about 25,000 baht, which is very, very small. I don't know if that's representative of what you can buy in rural Thailand, quite frankly. I suspect not. I think you probably will be paying for a quarter of a rai more like 50,000 these days, something like that. But quite often you don't have the ability to buy small parcels of land like that. You have to buy 2 rai or 3 rai. So you have to bear in mind that the actual land you get is going to cost you considerably more than we have spent, but you'll have a considerably larger plot as well. So in conclusion, I think that just about wraps up the series for the house build. Quite frankly, there's not a lot else to say. I've still got a few little jobs to do, as you always have with houses, whether they're new build or whether they're a house you've lived in for several years. There's always maintenance to do and odd things cropping up. But I've really fulfilled my dream that I've had over the last 12 months since we started this, of sitting here on the terrace with a drink, which you can see is pretty much finished. It's now about 4:30 in the afternoon, and I'm just enjoying the day coming to an end and looking across the rice fields and the pasture lands where the buffalo and the cows roam. I hope you'll follow some other videos I make, if I do make any. The subject matter will be very different from this house build, and very irregular, I should think, because my GoPro has just about had it now. I'm not making it last more than about 5 minutes recording before it overheats or the batteries give out. But I will endeavour to make other videos, and at this point I'll just say thank you very much everyone for supporting me and for watching. I haven't made any money out of this series at all, or any of my videos. I'm not monetised at all. The aim is just to be a hobby and for information purposes. So I hope you'll forgive that some of the content has been a bit boring, some of the filming has not been brilliant, but I hope it's been useful to some people. And if anyone's got any further questions regarding the build, feel free to ask in the comments. And if anyone wants to visit and actually see the place live, and they're close enough to Nondindang in Buriram, which is near the border with Sakau and Karat, and quite close to the Cambodian border as well, then feel free to ask in the comments, and we can make contact with each other and make arrangements. Thank you again, and goodbye.